Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday. I'm checking in from Florida. Ding. Let's light up the darkness. I'm sorry I don't have my candle and my bell handy, but you get the message. Who's in the house? Sharon in New Jersey, Paul in the Great Northwest, Guy in Ohio, Lucy in Minnesota, Spencer in Connecticut, Shandora in the Bronx, Belle in Texas, Yisrael Chai, praise for my daughter who has MOHS treatment tomorrow. May you only hear good news. May we only hear good news. May your daughter have a refuah shlema, complete and speedy recovery. Melissa in Great Neck, Bill in Mid-Missouri, going to catch it on replay because he's got a monthly meeting. Budgets. Sounds like a great meeting. Bella in Florida, Yehud in South Carolina. Sharon, it's a bit stormy here. A day after 99 degree humid heat. Lost power on and off. Hoping it stays on. Oh man. Oh, God. Yeah, in Florida. And you know what the thing is? We're all so soft, right? We can't imagine life in these kinds of climates without air conditioning. And yet people lived here before there was air conditioning, right? We can't imagine it, but yeah, people survived for how many thousands of years. And over on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Georgia, Lanit in Silver Spring, Chaim in Florida, Aoife in Florida. Guy, no candle or bell. I want a refund. Ding. All right, let's light up the darkness with our beautiful Limud Torah. Let's learn some Torah. Okay, our daf today is page 21, Chaf Aleph, here in Tractate Bava Basra, 23rd volume of the Talmud. We're picking this up near the bottom of page 20b with Mishna number 3 here in chapter 2. Mishna 3. If a resident wants to open a store in his courtyard, his neighbor can protest to prevent him from doing so and say to him, I am unable to sleep due to the sound of people entering the store and the sound of people exiting. This is a residential neighborhood. We have regulations. We have zoning ordinances, and here it is. Original Talmudic zoning ordinances. I mean, you could say this is a residential area. You can't open a store in your house next door to my house so that people are coming and going at all hours and I can't sleep. But one may fashion utensils in his house and go out and sell them in the market, despite the fact that he is not allowed to set up a store in the courtyard, and the neighbor cannot protest against him doing so and say to him, I am unable to sleep due to the sound of the hammer that you use to fashion utensils. Nor can he say, I can't sleep due to the sound of the mill that you use to grind. Nor can he say, I cannot sleep due to the sound of the children. It is permitted for one to make reasonable use of his own home. Now, obviously, you can't complain that your neighbor's kids are running around. He has a residence like you have a residence. But as we'll see, what they're really talking about is, can your neighbor open a school in his house so there's a lot of kids coming and going? And these are the kinds of neighborly disputes that have been going on for millennia. So let's get deeper into it. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. The Gemara asks, what is different in the first clause of the Mishnah? Let's see if I can prop this up a little higher. What is different in the first clause of the Mishnah, which states that one can prevent his neighbor from opening a store in the courtyard because the noise keeps him awake? And what is different in the latter clause, which states that one cannot protest when his neighbor performs labor that is noisy? I mean, if the problem with opening a store in your house is that there's going to be all this disturbance in the neighborhood that's going to keep people from falling asleep, Well, then how come you can protest? You cannot protest if he's fabricating, utensils in his house, even though that's going to be noisy with the hammer going. You can't protest to that, but you can protest if he opens a store. Why? So Abaye said, in the latter clause, we arrive at the case of one who operates in another courtyard, i.e., one cannot prevent activity in a separate courtyard that is connected to the alleyway in which he lives. And Rava said to him, well, if so, let it teach that in a different courtyard it is permitted. Why does the Mishnah not specify that it is referring to a different courtyard, down the alley? We're okay. I mean, that's further away. But that's not what it said. It said about your neighbor. So rather, Rava said, and now we're on page 21a, in the latter clause of the Mishnah, we arrive at the case of school children who come to learn Torah in his house. And this ruling applies from the time of the ordinance of Yehoshua ben Gamla and onward. And who was Yehoshua ben Gamla, and why is he remembered so fondly? What was this ordinance? As Rav Yehuda says, that Rav says, truly, the man is remembered for the good, and his name is Yehoshua ben Gamla. If not for him, the Torah would have been forgotten from the Jewish people. Initially, whoever had a father would have his father teach him Torah, and whoever did not have a father would not learn Torah at all. After all, when we recite the Shema prayer, the basic prayer every day, and it says about our word, the prayer that declares God's unity, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And then we continue, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your resources. And these words which I command you on this day shall be upon your heart. You shall teach them faithfully to your children. Right? So that the fact that we are Jews, the fact that we have a covenant as the Jewish people with the Lord our God that's been passed down to us from our forefathers and for the matriarchs and patriarchs, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, right? These words of the Torah come down to us through our parents, right? So the parents are instructed to teach the children. So what happens to an orphan? So it says here, if you have a father, not only do you have a father who can teach you Torah, but do you have a father who can teach you Torah, right? Not every father is able to teach. So those who had a father, A, have a father, not everyone has a father, and B, have a father who is capable of teaching Torah, so they would learn Torah. But everybody else would not learn Torah. That would be a terrible situation. And that's the way it was. And the Gemara explains, what verse did they interpret homiletically that allowed them to conduct themselves in this manner? Well, they interpreted the verse that states, and you shall teach them, otam, you shall teach them to your sons. That's Deuteronomy 11:19. And they interpreted that to mean, and you yourselves, atem, shall teach, i.e., you, fathers, shall teach your sons. And when the sages saw that not everyone was capable of teaching their children, and Torah study was declining in the nation, then they established an ordinance that teachers of children should be established in Jerusalem. And so the Gemara explains, what verse did they interpret homiletically that enabled them to do this? And they interpreted the verse, for Torah emerges from Zion, right? Zion, but Zion is the way we say it in English. So Isaiah chapter 2, verse 3. So Torah emerges from Zion. Zion refers to Jerusalem and the land beyond. So when we say that Torah emerges from Zion, they said, okay, well, Torah emerges from Zion, so we establish a Torah center in Jerusalem. And those who can't learn from their fathers go to Jerusalem and learn there. But still, whoever had a father, his father ascended with him to Jerusalem, and had him taught. But whoever did not have a father, he did not ascend and learn. Right? If you don't have a father to send you to Jerusalem and pay for you to have a place to eat and sleep, to have a place to sleep and food to eat, etc., then you didn't go. Right? If you didn't have somebody to send you to this academy in Jerusalem, so you didn't go. Therefore, the sages instituted an ordinance that teachers of children should be established in one city in each and every region, and they brought the students in but at what age? At the age of 16 or 17, right? So this is the evolution of schooling. Now, I think everyone would admit, no matter what they feel about the Jewish people, that the Jewish people have a reputation, well earned over thousands of years, of being a scholarly and bookish people, right? We are the people of the book, so the original book is the Torah, and we're commanded in the Torah, among all the other commandments, to teach, right, these laws to our children. So at first it was from father to son, but that wasn't going to cover everybody, so they started with the academy in Jerusalem, but that didn't cover everybody, so then they started regional academies. But all these academies were places where a person would go when he was 16 or 17. And if they didn't get the education before that, are they going to be ready to start learning at 16 or 17? So you see the problem. But as the students were old and had not yet had any formal education, a student whose teacher grew angry at him would rebel against him and leave. So it was impossible to hold the youths there against their will. And this state of affairs continued until Yehoshua ben Gamla came and instituted an ordinance that teachers of children should be established in each and every province and in each and every town, and they would bring the children in to learn at the age of 6 or 7. And with regard to the matter at hand, since this system was established for the masses, the neighbors cannot prevent a scholar from teaching Torah in the courtyard. Right? So when we said that you can't stop your neighbor from teaching children, even though you could stop him from what was it? From having from opening a store, right? So you can stop him from opening a store in his house because of all the traffic of people that are going to come and go from the store. You can say, yeah, that you can't do that in our neighborhood. This is not that kind of neighborhood. But you cannot stop him from opening a cheder, right? A school for children to teach them Torah. Why? Because this is an obligation of the Jewish people. And so as a people, we're obligated in this, and you can't stop your neighbor from fulfilling that obligation locally in your neighborhood. Now just a note about Yehoshua ben Gamla, who was this man. He's obviously famous for establishing this elementary school system, but a little bit more about him. Yehoshua ben Gamla was one of the last high priests during the Second Temple period. He's mentioned by Josephus as Yehoshua ben Gamliel. And he was appointed as high priest by King Agrippa II and was killed during the destruction of the temple. Interesting, he was one of the last, so he wasn't the last. Now, some authorities maintain that there were 2 individuals by this name, although this is probably incorrect. And while the sages disapproved of the way he attained his office, right, because it wasn't, in the late Second Temple period, sadly, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, had become an office, that people wanted to get. I mean, they only had Kohanim, right? So they didn't install people who weren't Kohens as the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. You got to be born a priest in order to become the high priest. But it should have been a system, they were chosen by the fellow Kohanim, etc. And instead it became more of a political office where you could be appointed by the king. There was a lot of corruption. This is why so many high priests either died or retired before Yom Kippur because they didn't think they would survive the ordeal of Yom Kippur, since they have to go into the Holy of Holies, and if you're impure, you won't come out of there alive. And if you obtained your office through corruption, not a good sign for you to come out of there alive. And that's why, there was, a dozen high priests, maybe more than a dozen, but a couple dozen, I don't remember what the exact number was, of high priests during the First Temple period. And during the Second Temple period, there was like 300. And so it was a much more of a rotating, revolving door. So nevertheless, even though he attained his position in a less than savory manner, once he had it, he was a sort of person who, attained high office, and everybody was very suspicious of him, and then he proved himself, and he really was a man of the people who delivered to the people. And one of the main things that he delivered was this elementary school system. So that although the sages disapproved of the way he attained his office, they nevertheless enumerated his achievements. You see this in Tractate Yoma 37a, and he is praised for having donated golden lottery cards to the temple, as well as for his efforts to promote Jewish education by establishing a wide-ranging system of schools in every town and region described by the Gemara here. So imagine that one person, we can point to one person and say that he created the elementary school system that, we all are beneficiaries of today. This idea that the Jews are a learned people is something that became so much more possible, and that continuity remained unbroken because of this system that Yehoshua ben Gamla established. So let's continue. 6 or 7, and it's a mitzvah on all the people, and that's why you can't tell your neighbor that he can't have this school for young kids in his house. Now, concerning that same issue, Rav said to Rav Shmuel bar Shela, a teacher who was a teacher of children, do not accept a student before the age of 6, as he is too young, and it is difficult for him to learn in a steady manner. From this point forward, right after he's 6 years old, accept him and stuff him with Torah like an ox. And Rav further said to Rav Shmuel bar Shaila, when you strike a child for educational purposes, hit him only with the strap of a sandal, which is small and does not cause pain. Right? So obviously, most of us have grown up in a time when teachers did not strike children, but that's relatively recent in human history. Prior to the last century, they certainly did hit the kids, and we've all read books and seen movies. They would hit the kid with a ruler on the hand, or they had a cane for whipping the kids. They would actually deliver whippings at school. I mean, it's pretty intense. But even here, 2,000 years ago, they said if you must strike a child to get his attention, you don't hurt him. Right? It's not that kind of a thing. Maybe you give him a little potch, to get his attention, to wake him up, but you don't hurt him. So Rav further advised this teacher of children, he who reads, let him read on his own. Whoever does not read, let him be a companion to his friends, which will encourage him to learn to read. Right? There's some wise teaching, right? Don't force it on the kids who are just not having it, especially at that age, 6 or 7, but encourage them to be around kids who are into learning, and they'll absorb that desire to learn themselves. Now, with regard to a courtyard, where we started this conversation, the Gemara concluded that it is permitted for one to establish an elementary school to teach Torah, and the neighbors cannot protest. Now, the Gemara raises an objection to this ruling from a Baraisa. With regard to one member of a courtyard who wishes to become a doctor, a bloodletter, a weaver, or a teacher of children, the other members of the courtyard can prevent him from doing so. And this indicates that neighbors can protest the teaching of children in their shared courtyard. And the Gemara answers with, what are we dealing here? I.e., when can they protest his teaching children? We are dealing with a case of Gentile children, as there is no commandment to educate them. In this situation, the neighbors can protest about the noise. Now, is this to say that Jews don't care about the children of non-Jews? No, they're not saying that. But remember that you can't infringe on the rights of your neighbors by just opening a business where people are going to be coming and going. You can open a school for Jewish children because we are commanded to instruct our children Torah. We're not commanded to instruct the children of other nations Torah. That's on their parents and their nation and their system. Since we don't have a commandment to do that, we can't override the quiet enjoyment of the neighborhood. Now the Gemara suggests, coming here another Baraisa, one who has a house in a jointly owned courtyard may not rent it to a doctor, nor to a bloodletter, nor to a weaver, nor to a Jewish teacher, nor to a Gentile teacher. Now this indicates that one's neighbors can prevent him from teaching Jewish children. And the Gemara answers, well, what are we dealing here? We are dealing with the scribe, the sofer of the town, who does not teach children, but writes documents and letters for the residents of the town. This type of work is not a mitzvah, and since many people seek his services, the residents of the courtyard can prevent him from performing this job near their houses. If he's going to run a business, he should do it on Main Street, where the other stores are. New subject. With regard to the ordinance of Yehoshua ben Gamla concerning teaching children in general, Rava says, from the time of the ordinance of Yehoshua ben Gamla, that school teachers must be established in each town. And onward, one does not bring a child from one town to another. In other words, if there are teachers in every town, can you go school shopping? And they're saying no. Right? You have to take the children to the teacher in your town. Now, obviously, some parents will say, yeah, well, the teacher in our town is not very good, and the teacher in the next town is awesome, so I'm going to make my kid commute to the next town. And he's saying you can't do that. So let's see why. Rather, each child is educated in the town where he resides. But one does bring them from one synagogue where they learn to another synagogue in the same town, I suppose. From one synagogue to another synagogue. And if a river separates the areas, one does not bring the children across the river, lest they fall in. And if there's a bridge spanning the river, then one may bring them across the river. But if there's only a narrow bridge, one does not bring them. Right? So education, incredibly important, but you're not going to put the children at risk in order to get them a slightly better education. And Rava said the maximum number of students for one teacher of children is 25 children. And if there are 50 children in a single place, one establishes 2 teachers, so that each one teaches 25 students. And if there are 40 children, one establishes an assistant, and the teacher receives help from the residents of the town to pay the salary of the assistant. And Rava said, if there is a teacher of children who teaches a few subjects, and there is another who teaches more subjects than him, one does not remove the first teacher from his position to hire the second, as perhaps the other teacher will come to be negligent due to the lack of competition. And Rav Dimi from Nehardea said, on the contrary, all the more so is it the case that he will teach in a better manner if he knows that he is the sole instructor in the place, as jealousy among teachers increases wisdom. In other words, the town will only have one teacher, but he knows that he can be fired and another one will be hired in his place. And since he knows there's other teachers who want this job, he'll do as good a job as he can and the children will benefit. Jealousy among teachers increases the wisdom of their students. Now, the one who was dismissed will try to refine his skills so that he will be rehired, and this will prevent negligence on the part of the other teacher. And Rava said, if there are 2 teachers of children, one who teaches a lot of material, but is not precise in his statements, and one who is precise, but does not teach a lot of material, one hires the one who teaches a lot of material, but is not precise. And why is this? Says Rava, because errors will be corrected by themselves, and no lasting harm will be caused. So better a teacher who's not so precise, makes mistakes here and there, but at least he can teach the kids about a lot of different subjects, as the things that he makes mistakes in, the things that he teaches wrong, eventually the kids will learn it from someone else, or they'll hear it in conversation from their parents, and the error will be corrected. That's Rava. Rav Dimi of Nehardea said, no. One hires the instructor who is precise and does not teach a lot of material. Better he should teach fewer subjects, but what he teaches correctly. Why? Because once an error is taught, it is taught, and it cannot be easily corrected. We've learned elsewhere that when a young child learns, right, it's like a blank page with fresh black ink. And whatever he learns at a young age, he'll never forget, right? Whereas when we learn when we're older, it's like we have, it's like we're a blackboard that's been written on and erased 1,000 times, and anytime there's new writing added, it's a little bit hard to see among all the other stuff that was there, and it's much harder to learn something new when you're older and take it in with that same level of bang, inscribed on the inner person, the way you do the way you learn things when you're young. So says Rav Dimi, no, the teachers who teach young children have got to be teaching correctly because that lesson's going to be there forever. And the law follows Rav Dimi of Nehardea. We will hire a teacher who doesn't teach so many things, but who teaches correctly. Now the Gemara cites a proof for the opinion of Rav Dimi of Nehardea, and this is as it is written, for Joab, and all Israel remained there 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom. Now, this is 1 Kings 11:16. So Joab was one of the commanders in the army of King David, and he was sent on a mission. And he was in a war against Amalek in Edom. Right? So Edom, the descendants of Esau were there. And he was sent on a mission, and in that time, in that place, and the way they did war was you wipe out the enemy. That's what he was commanded to do. And this was definitely one of the wars, that God had authorized King David to wage in. King David had access to the prophet Nathan. So if he was waging a campaign on behalf of Israel, this was sanctioned by God, and the command was wipe them out. 21b. Now, what is the reason? So he was told there. So for Joab and all Israel remained there 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom. When Joab came before King David after this episode, David said to him, "What is the reason that you did that?" And what he did was, Joab and all Israel remained there 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom, right? So they killed all the men in Edom. So then he came back and reported to King David what he'd done, and David said to him, "What is the reason you did that? Why did you kill only the males?" And Joab said to him, "Well, as it is written, you shall blot out the males of Amalek." Now, did it say you shall blot out the males of Amalek? It's funny that we're reading this right now, because a rabbi at the Maccabee qualifier today was actually citing this verse to me. And, when that happens in your world, you don't ignore the coincidence. So I have to think about that. But what it said in Deuteronomy 25:19, so not just in the prophets or the writings, but in the Torah itself, Deuteronomy 25:19, it says, "You shall blot out." Now Joab heard Zachar Amalek, which means all the males of Amalek. That's what Joab remembered that the Torah says. And David said to him, that's not what the Torah says. What the Torah says is, you shall blot out Zachor or Zecher Amalek. Right? What does that mean? The memory of Amalek. Right? So the words Zachar and Zachor or Zecher, very similar, sound very similar, but one means the males, and the other means the memory or the remembrance of. So, in other words, Joab heard it as, you shall kill all the men, you shall kill all the men of Amalek. And what the command actually said is, you shall wipe out the memory of Amalek. Right? Amalek is the eternal enemy of the Jewish people, and we are commanded to wipe out Amalek, and wipe out the memory of Amalek, and we have to remember to keep wiping out the memory of Amalek. So Joab misheard what his teacher taught him. That's what we're going to see now. So Joab said to him, I was taught to read it as Zachar. So Joab went and asked his childhood Bible teacher. And Joab said to him, how did you read this word to us? And the teacher said to him, I read it as Zecher. So the teacher had read it the proper way, wipe out the memory of Amalek. But he failed to notice that his student had learned it incorrectly. The teacher knew what it said. He said it kind of fast. He didn't test his students. There were a million other subjects that they were learning. Who knew that this little kid was going to grow up to be the general of an army who was tasked with going up against a population of Amalek in that generation, and sent by King David at the behest of God through his prophet to go kill Amalek. And he remembered the verse from the Torah, the way he learned it when he was a kid, which he remembered as saying, kill all the men of Amalek, and so he failed in his mission. Joab was really angry that his teacher had not noticed that he didn't convey the lesson properly to him when he was a kid, and that because of that, he now failed in his mission and let down King David. So Joab took a sword to kill his teacher. And the teacher said to him, "Why do you want to kill me?" And Joab said to him, "As it is written from Jeremiah 48:10, cursed is he who does the work of the Lord with a slack hand. And you taught me incorrectly. You didn't do your job properly, and now it's been a huge problem." Joab said to him, "It is also written, and cursed is he who keeps back his sword from blood." No, I'm sorry, I skipped something. Cursed is he who does the work of the Lord with a slack hand, and you taught me incorrectly. The teacher said to him, "Well, leave that man to remain as cursed." That man means himself. It's a euphemism for himself, right? But Jeremiah said, "Cursed is he who does the work of the Lord with a slack hand." That doesn't mean you will execute the man who does his work with a slack hand. It means he'll be cursed by God. It's not your job to execute him. The teacher made a great point. Leave that man to remain as cursed. That's a sufficient punishment. There's no need to kill me. Joab said to him, "It is also written, and cursed is he who keeps back his sword from blood." Jeremiah 48:10. Now, there are those who say that Joab killed him, and there are those who say that Joab did not kill him. But in any event, this episode demonstrates that an error learned in one's childhood stays with him his whole life. For anyone that remembers Ricky Bobby being told by his father, "If you're not first, you're last." "No, that's not what I meant," said his father 30 years later. You'll be reminded and have a chuckle. If you don't know what I'm talking about, moving on. And Rava says, with regard to a teacher of children, a professional tree planter, a butcher, a bloodletter, and a town scribe, all these are considered forewarned. In other words, they need not be exhorted to perform their jobs correctly, as if they err in the performance of their duties, they can be fired immediately. If you do a job that is important enough to the welfare of your people in your community, then everyone understands that you don't need a warning before you get fired, because if you don't do your job right, people die, or people get hurt, or people lose their livelihood, right? So anyone that the whole community depends on, if they do a bad job, you don't have to give them a warning. They get fired. Now, the principle of the matter is, with regard to any case where the loss is irreversible, the individual is considered forewarned. He doesn't need a warning. He gets fired. Now, new subject. Rav Huna said there was a certain resident of an alleyway who set up a mill, like a mill for grain, in the alleyway and earned his living grinding grain for people. And subsequently, another resident of the alleyway came and set up a mill next to his. And the law is that the first one may prevent him from doing so if he wishes, as he can say to him, "You are disrupting my livelihood by taking my customers." Now the Gemara suggests, let us say that a Baraisa supports this opinion. One must distance fish traps from fish, i.e. from other fish traps, as far as the fish travels, i.e. the distance from which the fish will travel. So the Gemara, in other words, fishermen can't all fish in the same place. Seems obvious why. The Gemara asks, and how much is that distance? And Rabba bar Rav Huna says up to a parasang. And this indicates that one must distance himself from the place where another person has established his business. You can't go fishing in the same place where somebody's making his livelihood fishing, because there won't be enough fish there to support both of you. You go find another fishing hole. Now the Gemara responds that this is not a proof. Perhaps fish are different. As they look around, one fish explores the area ahead of the others, indicating to them where to go. Once they encounter the first trap, they will not approach the second. Ravina said to Rava, shall we say that Rav Huna spoke in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? As we learned in the Mishna, Bava 60a, Rabbi Yehuda says, right, we covered this, a storekeeper may not hand out toasted grain and nuts, treats, to children who patronize his store, due to the fact that he thereby accustoms them to come to him at the expense of competing storekeepers. Yeah, that was the minority view. And the rabbis permit doing so. And this indicates that according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, all forms of competition are prohibited, which would include the scenario concerning the mill. Okay, according to Rabbi Yehuda, but the rabbis say, now storekeepers can compete with each other, and you can have a sale, and you can drop your prices, and you can offer, freebies and loss leaders to bring people in. To try to get the business, and all's fair in the retail game. But Rabbi Yehuda says, no, everybody gets a territory, and we let, you can imagine Rabbi Yehuda is probably making this ruling at a time when it's difficult to make a living and everyone is just scraping by, and it's like, come on, let each person make a living. Now the Gemara rejects this suggestion. You may even say that Rav Huna holds in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. The rabbis disagree with Rabbi Yehuda only there, as the storekeeper can say to his competitor, listen, if I distribute walnuts, you can distribute almonds. Right? In other words, if I can distribute treats to the children, you can do the same thing. Who's stopping you? But here, with regard to the resident of an alleyway who set up a mill in that alleyway where another mill already exists, even the rabbis concede that the owner of the mill, the first mill, can say to him, you are disrupting my livelihood, as beforehand whoever required grinding came to me, and you have provided them with another option. This ends up not being the law. It's definitely a gray area. For the most part, they don't stop competition because competition is good for the marketplace. It's good for the people. But the case they're giving is a little bit interesting, right? The residents of an alleyway. So we're talking about a small neighborhood. And one of them set up a mill that would provide for the needs of the neighborhood. So it's not like, he's getting rich off this. And now another guy in the same neighborhood is going to set up a competing mill. Okay. The Gemara raises an objection from a baraisa. A man may establish a shop alongside the shop of another, and a bathhouse along the bathhouse of another, and the other cannot protest because the newcomer can say to him, you operate in your space and I operate in my space, right? You rented that store and you're selling sweaters, and I rented the store next to you. I can sell whatever I want in my store, and if I want to sell sweaters, I'm going to sell sweaters. Now, I think that later in history, or maybe even back then, they realized that actually it's good if there's two stores selling sweaters right next to each other. And then there's a third and a fourth going to go in, and that becomes Sweater Street, right? So everyone in the city knows that when they need a sweater, they can go there and get the best selection of sweaters because they're all on that street. And everybody on the street ends up getting more business, not less, because there's multiple shops on that street selling the same kinds of merchandise. Then there's a whole thing of game theory of, well, where do you want to have your shop? In the middle, at the end? Very interesting topic for another class, another day. Now the Gemara answers, the entire matter is a dispute between Tanaim, the sages of the Mishna, the Mishnaic period. As it is taught in a baraisa, the residents of an alleyway can compel one another to agree not to allow among them in that alleyway a tailor, a tanner, a teacher of children, nor any type of craftsman. They can bar outside craftsmen from plying their trade in that alleyway. Private alleyway. It's actually a private street. It's not a city street. So yeah, they can stop outsiders from setting up their business there. But one cannot compel his neighbor, i.e. one who already lives in the alleyway, to refrain from practicing a particular occupation there. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says one can even compel his neighbor not to conduct such work in the alleyway. Rav Huna holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, right? So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that you can compel your neighbor not to conduct. So even in his own neighborhood, you could stop it. Presumably you could say, residential neighborhood, we're not opening businesses here. You can't stop him from opening a cheder, right, an elementary school for children, because that's a mitzvah on everybody. But you can all agree that we're not going to have businesses on this street. But absent, such a neighborhood ordinance, you can't tell your neighbor what to do and not do on his property. So Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, says, it is obvious to me that a resident of one town can prevent a resident of another town from establishing a similar business in the locale of the first individual. But if he pays the tax of that first town, he cannot prevent him from doing business there, as he too is considered a resident of the town. And the resident of an alleyway cannot prevent a resident of his alleyway, right, his neighbor, from practicing a particular trade there in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis in the baraisa, and contrary to the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, with these conclusions in mind, Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, raises a dilemma. With regard to a resident of one alleyway protesting about a resident of a different alleyway conducting business there, what is the law? And no answer was found. right? Because you can stop somebody from another town from coming to compete in your town, or you could set up some kind of no competition zone, but from the neighboring alleyway to your alleyway, it sounds like it could have been prohibitive, but then we're not going to, tamp down competition in this way, so they don't have the answer, right? No answer was found. Teku, this dilemma shall stand unresolved. Rav Yosef said, and Rav Huna, who said that a resident of an alleyway can prevent another from setting up an additional mill, concedes with regard to those who teach children that one cannot prevent them from working. As the master said, Ezra instituted an ordinance for the Jewish people requiring that they establish one teacher alongside another teacher to raise the standard of teaching. So you can say that Ezra established the yeshivas, for the older kids, but it wasn't until Yehoshua ben Gamla that we had the elementary school system throughout the Jewish world. The Gemara challenges, and let us be concerned lest the teachers will thereby come to be negligent. And Rav Yosef said to the sage who raised this objection, jealousy among teachers increases wisdom. It's good for the teachers to be a little insecure, not to have such a safe job where they can get lax and not be good teachers. Better they should feel like, unless I'm going to be a really good teacher, I could lose my job, because the students will benefit. Now we're on page 22a, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, who said that townspeople can bar craftsmen who come from other cities, concedes with regard to perfume salesmen who travel from one town to another, that the townspeople cannot prevent them from entering their town. As the master said, Ezra instituted an ordinance for the Jewish people that perfume salesmen shall travel from town to town so that cosmetics will be available to Jewish women. Since this ordinance was instituted on behalf of Jewish women, the sages ruled that these peddlers could not be barred from entering a town. Right? So women having their cosmetics, that's a serious requirement of the women, and no sages or busybody men can come along and prevent this. And the Gemara continues, and this matter applies only to one who seeks to travel from town to town as a salesman. He can't be barred from doing that. But if he wants to establish a shop, this ruling was not stated, and the townspeople can prevent him from doing so. And if he is a Torah scholar, he may even establish a shop as a perfume salesman. And this is like that incident in which Rabbah permitted Rabbi Yoshia and Rab Ovadia to establish a shop not in accordance with the halacha. And what is the reason for this ruling? The reason is that since they are rabbis, they are likely to be distracted from their studies should they be required to travel from place to place. So rather than force them to ply their trade as traveling salesmen of perfume and cosmetics for women, they allow them to set up a shop. But interesting that although you must allow perfume salesmen to come in and out of your town, to travel, to have this job so that women can get their cosmetics, you can say, but we'll have no cosmetic shop in the town. Very interesting. Why would that be? Did they explain it? It's not explained. I think that the issue is explained elsewhere. That it's problematic, to have a man engaged in a business behind a door, not outside in the marketplace, but in a shop where his clientele are all women, right? Because that could lead to inappropriate situations. But if they're traveling, traveling salesmen, then presumably we're not going to have the same issue of having one locale where women are always coming to talk to this one guy. The men are just passing through. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. No questions. And just a comment from Sharon. In Poland, they started cheder, right, this elementary school for Jewish kids, at 3 years of age. And my dad, says Sharon, said that they started Rashi at 5. Amazing, right? Not just learning how to read, but studying Rashi's commentary, presumably on the Torah, and perhaps going on to Tanakh, but wow, right? Wow, not just reading, but studying laws and interpretation of the Torah at such a young and tender age. Incredible, right? Wonderful. You can see why so many gifted Torah scholars emerged in those Polish communities. That's what I've got for us today. No class tomorrow, Wednesday. I'll be traveling, and with God's help, we'll resume from our regular location, my office in LA, with the bell and the candle on Thursday.